This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned. We are here to bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today we have Zach Borodkin, advocate here at DRNY. He's going to discuss his personal experience with the MTA's accessibility issues in New York City. Hi, Zach. How you doing today?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
We're good over here. Thank you so much for joining us. Will you start off by telling us a little bit about your history, where you live in New York City, how long you've been there and been a resident?
So I was born and raised in Manhattan. I lived downtown in the Chelsea area, which is the Lower West Side, for basically my whole life until I moved to Harlem 4 years ago.
And so, having always lived in New York City, were you always taking public transportation, or at what age were you taking public transportation by yourself?
So I started taking transportation by myself when I was around 12, 13 years old. That was the time that I started middle school, but it goes back earlier than that because my parents took me everywhere when I was around 3 years old, so I really started to get a sense of the gaps, both literal and figuratively speaking, in accessibility on transportation from a very early age.
Well, we're here in upstate New York, and we don't have a subway system, so it's definitely something for us to wrap our heads around, taking public transportation at 12. Not up here. So can you share your experience in taking the MTA in regards to your disability?
So basically, because of my disability, I perceive things very differently than most people do. I really have to learn to quickly adapt to my surroundings, whatever they may be, and to literally adjust my body to those surroundings. So, as you know, the station on Clark Street in downtown Brooklyn has an elevator, but that elevator goes down to a set of steps to actually get to the platform where the trains are. Sometimes when adjusting to my environment, I can only adjust so much, and I've been in situations where I've had to ask for help, which has been generally well received by other people around me.
Are your experiences any different if you were taking the bus?
So taking the bus is a little different than taking the train, just because there are no staircases to deal with, even though the bus does have stairs. So a little bit of history about the buses. When I first started taking the buses, it was at a time when buses did not have ramps coming out of the front of the bus. Instead, they had them coming out of the back of the bus. And I wasn't always in crutches. I was in a walker. It was a big and bulky metal contraption that took up a lot of space. It took time for me to get on the bus because the bus driver had to operate the lift, which took some time. And then I'll get into this later, but as I transitioned to crutches, it became easier for me because all I had to do was get up the front of the bus and only take a few steps. So it was quicker and more efficient with my crutches than it was with my walker.
And have you found that it's a difference now with the placement of the ramp as opposed to before having it in the back?
I think it's easier because, first off, the ramp comes out quicker in the front than it does in the back. It's deployed quicker. And whenever I'm offered the ramp, I always tell them I don't need it because the ramp in itself is a step, and there's only one step instead of multiple. And they still have handrails on the side, so it's an adjustment, but it's not as big as an adjustment as it used to be.
Okay, good to know. So tell us a little bit about your daily commute as far as accessibility is concerned.
As I mentioned, I live in East Harlem. I am by the 4 and the 5 train, and I am by the 2 and the 3 train. The 2 and the 3 train gets me off at Clark Street, which is closer to the office, so I usually take that train. My commute is usually, I want to say, an hour 15, just because it's 45 minutes on the train, 15 minutes to get from my house to the train station, and then 15 minutes to get from the train station in Brooklyn to the office. There's always obstacles such as cracked pavement or bumps or steep sidewalks or no curb cuts. And then, the Clark Street station, or rather the station on 125th Street, in Harlem doesn't have an elevator, so I have to walk down the stairs. Even though there is a gate for people with wheelchairs, that gate has to be opened manually. There's no place to insert your Metro card to open the gate, so I usually just end up using the turnstile. But again, I'm always adjusting to my environment, and as long as I feel balanced, because that's what it comes down to, is balance. As long as I feel balanced within my own environment, then I can pretty much make it.
And how about seasonally? What changes for you as here in New York, we have a pretty harsh winter. I know that cities try to be as efficient as possible with snow removal, but there are times where you just can't help that. How does that affect your commute as well?
It slows it down, depending on how bad it is. I just want to say that on the 1st of May, it was freezing when I was coming home last night. Luckily there was no snow, but getting back to that, sometimes when it snows, my crutch tips are rubber, so they easily slip on the platform or on the floor. It all comes down to what the platform is made out of. If it's concrete, my crutches can grip easily, and I have little to no issues. But if it's, let's say, tile, as it is with the Clark Street station, then I'm more likely to slip, so I have to adjust to those conditions as well. And it slows it down sometimes significantly.
Well, yes, we are very thankful that it is not snowing here in May, although I don't know that any of us would be surprised at this point. So you're very familiar with the MTA system, and how do you adjust to all of the systems that are sometimes changing and sometimes less accessible than every day? How do you adjust to those?
Well, as I mentioned before, sometimes I can only adjust so much, and sometimes I just have to ask for help. And one of the things that I want to preface to our audience is to not be afraid to ask for assistance from anybody. I know that we're at an age where people realize that disability is now a civil rights issue, but there's no clear consensus as to whether or not, for lack of a better choice of words, that that's a good thing, because there's still some controversy over the disability community. But don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't assume that people are going to look down on you just because you have a disability. It's always important to reach out to other people if you need help to get to wherever it is you're going.
That's great advice. And you talked a little bit earlier about transitioning from a walker to crutches. Can you talk to us a little bit about your reasoning behind that decision?
So this has been something that I've been thinking about for a long, long time. It happened in 2007, but leading up to that point, my parents always kept telling me, when you're ready, you'll do it. Despite all of the physical therapy that I had and all of my operations when I was younger, they just said to me, when you're ready, you'll do it. And I began my transition in college because I started traveling a lot. I went to college in another state. I went to college in Connecticut at the University of New Haven, where it's just a lot of flat land. So that's an adjustment in itself. Because I was traveling, I needed to, to make room to get to wherever I was going. And the crutches, not only did I have more room to move, but I was faster on the crutches than I was in my walker. And that was a big adjustment for me, because I had been in a walker since I was 3 years old, and now all of a sudden I'm making this transition as I'm turning 20 years old. So it's a big mental and a big physical adjustment for me.
And you had talked about being able to adjust just so long as you had balance. So is this a new sense of balance for you as you made the transition?
Yeah, because the walker, I was almost literally surrounded by a metal contraption. I don't have any pictures to show you, and I got rid of the walker that I had a long, long time ago. But it was a big metal contraption that gave me a lot of support. And when I transitioned to the crutches, it was two sticks that I had to adjust to, because I didn't have as much support. So my body had to adjust to that setting.
So you were adapting again. And so does your ability to adapt, does that impact how your perceived surroundings change as you're using public transportation?
Yeah, because now that I have more room, my perception of my surroundings is bigger than it was. And I have to adjust from the big things to the little things. So if there's a single wet spot on the floor, I have to, be vigilant about that and move around it to avoid slipping. If there are steps, I have to adjust my body in a way where I'm going to still be able to go down the steps while being balanced. My perception has changed in the fact that I have more room to navigate, so I have more time to adjust to my surroundings as I could take more in.
So, as you're experiencing and navigating the MTA, what advice do you have for others who may be experiencing some of the same barriers that you're experiencing, such as the elevator down to steps that really are something that you need to adapt to in order for you to use that station?
I mean, it depends, because I also know that not everyone in our audience lives in an urban area. So it really depends on where you live. Your adjustments depend on where you live, basically. If you live in an area that is not a big bustling city, that's going to affect your perception and what adjustments you need to make. And also, accessibility isn't standard universally. Different areas have different standards for accessibility. So you really need to adjust depending on where you are. And, if you're active, don't be afraid to talk to people and to get involved in local politics, because this not only comes down to how you adjust, but it comes down to what you want to see as far as improvements to make the subways and buses and travel in general more accessible. So don't be afraid to get involved with your local, politicians or your local municipalities and tell them what you experience.
I think that's the most important key is, allowing for that dialogue and communication to say, this has been my experience and what can we do about it now? I think that's great advice.
Right, and it also adds perspective coming from the person who experiences these things daily. Because the problem with our politics today, one of the problems is that you have people making decisions for separate groups, and the people making those decisions don't necessarily experience certain things the way the group that wants the change actually does. So it's important to have that extra perspective in there to add to that dialogue and to make the changes that you want to see.
Agreed. Zach, thank you so much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Is there anything else you want to let our audience know today before we sign off?
As I said before, there are going to be times when you're in your environment and you can only adjust so much to your settings. I've even had this trouble in my own house. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Even though you believe you can adjust, there are going to be times where you just need to ask for help. So just reach out your hand, sometimes literally. I'm sure that the other person or people will respond in kind.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Zach. We look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you. You too.
If you have experienced any accessibility issues with the MTA or any other public transportation, please comment below or email us at podcast@drny.org. Let's keep this conversation going. Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, and we hope you did, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. Tune in next time where we'll bring you more information on disability rights in the state of New York. The closed caption version of this podcast is available on our YouTube channel. Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned is now streaming on iTunes and Spotify.